They thought she didn't belong there. But what they didn't know was that every word they were about to say would cost them more than money could ever fix as Emily Carter stepped through the wide glass doors of Westbridge Academy, the kind of place where tuition rivaled a year's salary for most American families and expectations were measured in six-figure donations rather than report cards. Her presence barely making a sound against the polished marble floors that reflected crystal chandeliers and tailored suits. And yet somehow every eye found her within seconds, not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't fit the unspoken uniform of luxury that surrounded her. Her faded denim jeans, soft gray cardigan, and simple flats standing in quiet contrast to designer handbags and heels that clicked like a metronome of status across the room. Her son's small hand wrapped in hers as he looked up at the towering ceilings with wide-eyed curiosity, unaware of the social storm already beginning to form around them. And Emily moved calmly, her posture steady, her expression composed, as if she had walked into far more intimidating rooms than this before. But the whispers started anyway, soft at first, almost polite, then sharper, more deliberate, cutting through the hum of conversation like glass under pressure. Is she lost? One voice murmured just loud enough to be heard, followed by a faint, restrained laugh, and across the lobby stood Victoria Hayes, perfectly poised in a cream blazer that probably cost more than Emily's entire outfit. Her blonde hair styled with effortless precision, her smile tight as her gaze locked onto Emily with the kind of practiced judgment that came from years of deciding who belonged and who didn't. And without moving closer, she tilted her head slightly, signaling to the small circle of women around her, each one equally polished, equally observant. And the energy shifted, subtle but unmistakable, as conversation slowed. Attention narrowed, and the invisible line between us and her drew itself across the room, and Emily felt it. Of course she did, but she didn't react, not outwardly, not yet, instead guiding her son toward the front desk where a receptionist glanced up, hesitated for half a second too long, then forced a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. And before Emily could respond, the soft echo of heels approached from behind, steady, deliberate, and Victoria's voice followed, smooth and measured, carrying just enough volume to invite an audience. "Admissions are usually scheduled in advance," she said, her gaze sweeping over Emily's outfit without apology. "Westbridge tends to attract a very specific clientele," and the words hung there, wrapped in courtesy but sharpened with intent, drawing a few more glances, a few more subtle smirks, and Emily turned slowly, meeting Victoria's eyes for the first time, her own calm, unreadable, almost unsettling in its steadiness. And for a brief moment, something flickered beneath Victoria's confidence, something she couldn't quite place, but she pushed past it quickly, stepping closer, her smile widening just enough to suggest control. And around them, the room grew quieter, conversations fading into a low murmur as anticipation built, as if everyone sensed that something was unfolding, something small but significant. And Emily simply stood there, her hand still resting on her son's shoulder, her voice soft but clear as she finally spoke. "I'm here for the parent orientation." And though the words were simple, the way she said them carried a quiet certainty that didn't match the assumptions already made about her. And somewhere in the background, the faint sound of glass doors opening echoed through the lobby, unnoticed by most, but not by the narrator of this moment, because what was about to happen next would turn every whisper, every glance, and every careless judgment into something no one in that room would ever forget. The room did not return to normal after Emily spoke. It only shifted, like something invisible had been disturbed and could not be settled again as Victoria's smile held for a moment too long, the kind that began to strain at the edges when confidence met something it could not quite define. And the other women around her exchanged glances, subtle but telling, their earlier amusement fading into a cautious curiosity, because there was something about Emily's tone that did not match the role they had already assigned to her, something steady, something unbothered. And that was not how these situations usually went, not in a place like Westbridge where hierarchy was understood without being spoken. And yet here she was, standing in the center of it, calm, composed, as if she had not just been quietly challenged in front of a room full of strangers, Parent orientation is for enrolled families, Victoria replied, her voice still smooth but now carrying a firmer edge, her posture straightening as if reclaiming control of a narrative that had briefly slipped. I do not recall seeing your name on the donor list or the enrollment records. And there it was again, the emphasis not on process, but on status. Drawing a few nods from those nearby who had begun to listen more closely, their interest now fully captured, and Emily glanced briefly toward the front desk, where the receptionist hesitated again, fingers hovering over the keyboard as if unsure which direction this moment would take, before looking back at Victoria with the same quiet expression. That is because I just completed the enrollment this morning, she said simply, her voice even, without defensiveness, without explanation. And the words landed with a soft but noticeable shift in the room, like a note played slightly off-key in an otherwise perfect performance, causing a ripple of doubt that moved quickly through the onlookers. But Victoria did not step back, not yet, instead letting out a light laugh that did not quite reach her eyes. Westbridge does not process same-day enrollments, she said, her tone now carrying a hint of amusement again, though it felt more deliberate this time, as if carefully placed to regain the upper hand. There is a waiting list, background reviews, interviews. It is not exactly a walk-in situation. And a few quiet chuckles followed, softer than before, more measured, but still there, reinforcing the invisible wall that had already been built around Emily. And for a moment, the tension seemed to tighten again, drawing everything back into familiar territory. But Emily did not argue, did not raise her voice, did not even shift her posture. She only nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a detail that was not entirely relevant, and then said, I understand the process, in a tone so calm it almost felt out of place. And that was when the unease began to grow, subtle but undeniable, because confidence like that did not belong to someone who was guessing, and Victoria felt it, even if she did not admit it, her eyes narrowing just slightly as she studied Emily more carefully now, looking for something she might have missed, some sign that would justify the assumption she had already made. But instead she found nothing out of place, nothing uncertain, just a woman standing exactly where she intended to be, and around them, the room had grown quieter still. Conversations now fully paused as more people turned their attention toward the unfolding exchange, drawn in by the tension that no longer felt one-sided. And in the distance, near the entrance, a few staff members began to move with quiet urgency, their expressions shifting as if they had just received information that did not align with what they were seeing. And though no one had spoken it yet, the balance in the room was beginning to tilt, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that the certainty which had filled the air just minutes ago was starting to crack, and Emily, still holding her son's hand, simply waited, her eyes steady, her presence unshaken, as if she already knew something the rest of the room had yet to understand. The shift in the room was no longer subtle. It was building, slow and steady, like pressure behind glass that had not yet shattered but was no longer safe to ignore as Victoria crossed her arms, her posture tightening just enough to reveal the first crack in her composure. Because this was not how these moments were supposed to unfold, not here, not in a place where she controlled the tone, the pace, and the outcome. And yet Emily Carter stood there without apology, without hesitation, her calm presence quietly dismantling the script that had played out so predictably so many times before, and the silence that followed her last words stretched longer than anyone expected, long enough for people to begin noticing things they had overlooked just minutes ago. The way she held herself, the certainty in her voice, the absence of nervous gestures that usually accompanied someone out of place, and it unsettled them, even if they could not explain why. Well, Victoria finally said, her voice slightly sharper now, as if trying to cut through something invisible. I am sure administration will clarify this shortly. And the statement sounded less like confidence and more like a hope that the system would correct what she believed to be an error. And just as the words left her lips, a man in a dark suit appeared near the hallway leading to the administrative offices, his pace quick but controlled, his eyes scanning the room with growing urgency until they landed on Emily. And something in his expression changed instantly, recognition flashing across his face as he adjusted his tie and moved directly toward her. bypassing every other parent in the lobby without a second glance, and the effect was immediate. Conversations that had already quieted now stopped completely, the air tightening as heads turned in unison, watching as the man approached with a level of respect that did not match the assumptions that had been made only moments ago. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice formal, slightly breathless, as if he had hurried to reach her. "We have been expecting you." And the words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the room that no one could ignore, because expectation implied preparation, and preparation implied importance. And suddenly the narrative shifted again, faster this time, harder to control, and Victoria's expression faltered, just for a second, her eyes narrowing as she processed what she had just heard, her mind moving quickly to reconcile this new information with the version of reality she had already committed to. But nothing aligned. Nothing made sense in the way she needed it to. And Emily simply nodded, her demeanor unchanged, as if this was exactly how things were supposed to happen. "Thank you," she replied calmly, her voice steady, while her son looked up at the man with quiet curiosity, unaware that every adult in the room was now recalculating their assumptions in real time. And the man gestured politely toward the hallway. "The principal is ready to meet with you whenever you are," he added, his tone respectful, deferential even, and that single sentence shifted the balance completely. Because principals did not wait, not for people like the one they thought Emily was, and the realization spread quickly, visible in the subtle changes of posture, in the way shoulders straightened and expressions softened, in the sudden absence of smirks and whispers that had filled the room just minutes before. And for the first time since Emily had walked in, no one spoke, no one laughed, no one dared to fill the silence that now pressed against them from all sides. And Victoria stood there, her confidence slipping through her fingers as the weight of the moment settled in, because something had gone wrong, something she could not control. And as Emily gently guided her son forward, following the man toward the hallway without looking back, the room remained frozen, caught between what they had believed and what was now unfolding right in front of them. And somewhere deep in that silence, the first hint of realization began to take hold, quiet but undeniable, that they had misjudged someone they never should have underestimated in the first place. The hallway swallowed the tension behind them, but it did not disappear. It followed, lingering in the quiet space between footsteps as Emily walked beside her son, her pace unhurried, her posture unchanged, as if nothing unusual had happened at all, while the man in the suit kept slightly ahead, glancing back once as if to confirm she was truly there, that this moment was real and not some miscalculation that would unravel at any second. And when they reached the large wooden doors at the end of the corridor, he paused, straightened his jacket, and opened them with a careful respect that spoke louder than any words he could have chosen, revealing an office lined with tall windows and polished shelves, where the principal of Westbridge Academy stood waiting, not seated behind his desk, but standing, as if greeting someone whose presence required more than routine courtesy. "Miss Carter," he said, stepping forward immediately, his expression composed but unmistakably attentive. "We appreciate you coming in on such short notice." And the phrasing alone carried weight, because appreciation implied invitation, not obligation. And the distinction mattered more than anyone outside that room could yet understand, and Emily offered a small nod, her voice calm as ever. "Thank you for arranging this so quickly," she replied, and her son looked around the office with quiet curiosity, his gaze lingering on framed photographs and awards that reflected years of prestige and carefully built reputation. And for a brief moment, the room held a different kind of silence, not the tense, judgmental quiet of the lobby, but something more measured, more deliberate, as if every word from this point forward would carry consequences beyond the walls of the school. And the principal gestured toward the seating area. "Please, have a seat," he said, though he remained standing himself, his attention focused entirely on Emily. And as she sat, placing a reassuring hand on her son's shoulder, the conversation that followed unfolded with a level of formality that contrasted sharply with the assumptions made just minutes earlier. "We have reviewed the documentation you submitted this morning," the principal began, choosing his words carefully, "and everything has been processed according to the directive we received." And the word directive lingered in the air, subtle but significant, hinting at a decision that had not originated within the usual channels. And Emily simply listened, her expression unchanged, as if this confirmation was expected, not surprising, while the principal continued. Your son's enrollment is confirmed, effective immediately. And though the statement was straightforward, the tone behind it carried an undercurrent of awareness, as if he understood that this moment was not just administrative, but symbolic, and outside the office, beyond the closed doors, the lobby had not returned to normal. Not even close, because word traveled quickly in places like Westbridge, faster than facts, faster than explanations, and already the earlier scene had begun to shift in retelling. The certainty of judgment replaced by quiet speculation, by questions no one wanted to ask out loud. And Victoria Hayes remained where she had been left, her arms no longer crossed, her posture no longer rigid, her mind replaying every word she had said, every glance she had exchanged, now viewed through a different lens, one that stripped away the confidence she had relied on just moments before. And the women around her had grown silent, their earlier amusement gone, replaced by a careful distance, as if proximity to the situation itself had become something to manage, something to reconsider. And back inside the office, the principal finally took his seat, though his attention did not waver. There are a few details we would like to discuss privately, he added, his voice lowering slightly, signaling a shift from formal confirmation to something more controlled, more intentional. And Emily nodded once more, her calm unwavering, because she already understood what was coming next, understood that the moment in the lobby had not been the conclusion, but only the beginning of something much larger, something that would not just correct assumptions, but redefine them entirely. And as the door remained closed behind them, separating two very different versions of reality, the truth continued to move quietly into place, piece by piece, waiting for the moment it would no longer be contained. The air inside the office felt controlled, deliberate, as if every second was being measured carefully, while the principal folded his hands on the desk, his expression shifting from formal politeness to something more cautious, more aware of the weight behind this meeting. And Emily sat quietly across from him, her son beside her tracing the edge of a polished wooden chair with small, curious fingers, unaware that the conversation unfolding around him was already reshaping how people in that building would remember this day. There is one matter we need to address before we proceed further, the principal said, his voice lowering slightly as he glanced toward the closed door, ensuring privacy. We received direct confirmation from the board this morning regarding your enrollment. And the word board carried a gravity that was impossible to ignore, because decisions at that level did not move quickly without reason, and they certainly did not override established procedures unless something, or someone, required it. And Emily nodded once, her calm demeanor unchanged, as if this detail was simply another step in a process she already understood, while the principal continued, choosing each word with precision. Your family's association with the Carter Foundation has been noted, as well as prior contributions that were not publicly disclosed. And there it was, the first layer of truth beginning to surface, quiet but undeniable. And though he did not elaborate, he did not need to, because the implication alone was enough to shift the entire context of what had happened in the lobby moments earlier. And Emily's gaze remained steady, her voice soft when she responded. We prefer to keep our involvement private, she said, and the simplicity of her statement carried a quiet authority that needed no further explanation. And the principal inclined his head slightly, acknowledging both the request and the reality behind it. Of course, he replied quickly, almost too quickly, as if correcting himself in real time. And outside the office, the ripple effect had grown stronger, staff members moving with unusual awareness, hushed conversations forming and dissolving in corners of the lobby as fragments of information began to connect in ways that made people uncomfortable, because the version of Emily they had created in their minds was no longer holding together. And back inside, the principal shifted in his seat, his tone now more careful than before. There was also a call placed shortly after your arrival, he added, pausing just enough to let the weight of the statement settle. From someone requesting assurance that your experience here meets a certain standard. And though he did not say the name, he did not need to, because Emily's eyes flickered for the briefest moment, a subtle acknowledgement that did not go unnoticed, and the silence that followed was different now, heavier, filled with unspoken understanding, because influence like that did not appear without reason, and it certainly did not act without intention, and Emily leaned back slightly, her posture still composed, still controlled, as she looked toward the principal with the same quiet certainty that had unsettled the room earlier. "I am not concerned with appearances," she said, evenly, "only with how people are treated," and the words landed with a quiet finality that carried more weight than any raised voice ever could, and the principal straightened immediately, nodding in agreement, though a hint of tension remained in his expression, because he knew exactly what she was referring to, even if it had not been stated directly. And in that moment, the conversation shifted again, no longer about enrollment, no longer about process, but about something deeper, something that would not remain contained within the walls of that office for much longer. And as the clock on the wall ticked softly in the background, marking the passage of time that now felt increasingly significant, the reality of what had happened in the lobby began to settle into place, not as an isolated moment, but as the beginning of a correction that would soon reach far beyond a single conversation, because the truth, once acknowledged, rarely stayed quiet for long. The silence that followed her words did not fade. It deepened, settling into the room with a quiet authority that neither the principal nor the man standing by the door could ignore, because Emily Carter had not raised her voice, had not demanded anything, and yet the standard had just been set in a way that could not be undone, and the principal understood it immediately, his posture straightening further as if responding to something unspoken but undeniable. "Of course," he said again, this time more carefully, more deliberately, as though the weight of the moment required precision. "Westbridge prides itself on maintaining an environment of respect and professionalism for all families," and the words sounded practiced, rehearsed even, but the tone behind them carried something new, something cautious, because respect, in this context, was no longer an abstract principle. It had just been tested, and it had not held, and both of them knew it. Even if it remained unspoken, and Emily's gaze remained steady, not confrontational, not accusatory, simply present, which somehow made it harder to deflect, harder to dismiss. And her son shifted slightly in his seat, looking up at her as if sensing the change in atmosphere, and she offered him a small reassuring smile before returning her attention to the principal. "Then I am sure you understand why I noticed what happened out there," she said quietly, her voice even, but unmistakably clear, and for a brief moment, the principal hesitated, the first real break in his composure, because acknowledgement meant responsibility, and responsibility meant action. And in institutions like this, action often came with consequences that extended far beyond a single interaction, but he nodded nonetheless, slowly at first, then with more certainty. "Yes," he admitted, his voice lower now, more honest. "I understand." And the admission shifted something again, not in volume, not in tone, but in direction, because now the conversation was no longer about whether something had occurred, but about what would follow, and outside the office. The quiet tension had reached a point where it could no longer remain contained, whispers turning into cautious conversations as fragments of information aligned into something more concrete. The mention of the Carter Foundation, the sudden appearance of administrative staff, the shift in tone from dismissal to deference, all of it forming a picture that made people uncomfortable in ways they could not easily explain. And Victoria Hayes stood near the center of it all, her earlier confidence now replaced by a careful stillness, her mind moving quickly through possibilities, trying to reconstruct what she had missed, what she had misunderstood, and more importantly, what this meant for her, because in a place where reputation was currency, misjudgment carried a cost, and she was beginning to feel it, even before it had been fully realized. And back inside the office, the principal exhaled slowly, as if accepting the direction this conversation had taken. "We will address the situation appropriately," he said, choosing his words with deliberate care. "Our staff will be reminded of our expectations, and any concerns will be handled with discretion." And though the statement sounded measured, it lacked something that Emily noticed immediately, because it spoke of systems, not people, of policy, not accountability. and she let a brief silence settle between them before responding, her voice calm but firm in a way that could not be mistaken. "Respect is not something that can be reminded after the fact," she said, her eyes meeting his directly. "It is something that should already be there," and the simplicity of the statement carried a weight that no formal response could match, and the principal felt it, his expression tightening just slightly as he nodded again, this time without speaking, because there was nothing he could say that would make that statement less true, and for a moment, the room held that truth quietly, without defense, without excuse, and in that stillness, something began to take shape, not yet visible, not yet spoken, but inevitable, because moments like this did not end with acknowledgement, they led somewhere. And as the faint sound of movement outside the office door hinted at what was beginning to unfold beyond their view, it became clear that the real turning point had not yet arrived. It was only just beginning to reveal itself. The quiet outside the office door finally broke, not with noise, but with presence, the kind that shifted attention without a single word spoken as the handle turned slowly and the door opened just enough to reveal the man who stepped inside, and everything in the room adjusted in response before anyone even acknowledged him. Because Daniel Carter did not rush, did not announce himself. He simply entered with a calm certainty that carried its own authority, his tailored navy suit sharp against the soft light filtering through the tall windows, his gaze steady as it moved first to Emily, then briefly to their son, and only then to the principal, who rose immediately, almost instinctively, as if responding to a signal he had been expecting but still was not entirely prepared for. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone respectful, measured, but unmistakably different from before, and the shift did not go unnoticed, not by Emily, not by the man standing near the door, and certainly not by Daniel himself, who offered a small nod, his expression composed. "I apologize for arriving unannounced," he said, though there was no uncertainty in his voice, only control, as he stepped closer to Emily's side, resting a hand lightly on the back of her chair, a gesture simple in appearance but powerful in its quiet assertion of connection, of presence, of alignment, and the room seemed to tighten around that moment, as if everything that had been discussed, every assumption made, every word spoken outside that office had suddenly been pulled into a single point of clarity, and the principal straightened slightly, his attention now divided but focused, aware that the conversation had just shifted into something far more consequential. "We were just discussing the enrollment," he began, but Daniel raised a hand gently, not to interrupt, but to pause the direction, his voice calm as he spoke. "I am aware," he said, his eyes briefly meeting Emily's before returning to the principal. "I received the call," and the statement landed quietly, but it carried a weight that filled the space between them, because it confirmed what had only been implied before, that influence had already moved, that awareness had already reached beyond these walls, and the principal nodded, slower this time, more carefully, as if recognizing that the conversation he thought he was managing had already extended far beyond his control, and for a moment, no one spoke, the silence stretching just long enough to allow the reality of the situation to settle fully into place. And then Daniel continued, his tone unchanged, steady, deliberate. "My wife does not require special treatment," he said, each word measured. "She requires what every family here is promised," and the simplicity of the statement made it impossible to deflect, impossible to reinterpret, because it was not a demand, it was a standard, and the principal felt it immediately, his posture tightening as he nodded again, this time with a clarity that had not been present before. "Of course," he replied, though the words now carried the weight of acknowledgement rather than routine agreement, and Emily remained quiet, her presence unchanged, because this was not about speaking louder, it was about allowing the truth to stand on its own. And Daniel's gaze shifted briefly toward the closed door, as if aware of everything happening beyond it, the whispers, the recalculations, the quiet unraveling of assumptions that had already begun, and when he looked back, his expression had not hardened, but it had sharpened, just enough to signal that the moment of observation had ended, and something else was about to begin, something that would not stay contained within this office, something that would reach back into the lobby where it all started, where words had been spoken too easily, where judgments had been made too quickly. And as the clock ticked softly on the wall, marking a moment that would soon divide what had been assumed from what was now understood, it became clear that the real exposure had not yet happened, but it was no longer avoidable. It was already on its way. The door opened again, but this time it did not feel like an interruption. It felt like a signal, a quiet command that pulled the next moment into motion as the principal glanced toward the hallway and then back at Daniel, his expression tightening just enough to show he understood what was about to happen. Because this was no longer a private discussion, it was about to become something visible, something that could not be contained behind closed doors, and Daniel did not need to raise his voice or repeat himself. He simply turned slightly, his hand resting briefly on Emily's shoulder, a silent reassurance before he stepped back, giving space not out of hesitation, but out of control, and that distinction mattered, because this was not about confrontation, it was about clarity, and clarity had a way of exposing everything without effort. And as the principal moved toward the door, opening it fully this time, the sound of the lobby returned, softer than before, but filled with anticipation, with the quiet tension of people who knew something had shifted but did not yet understand how far it would go. And when they stepped out together, the room reacted instantly, conversation stopping mid-sentence, eyes turning, posture adjusting, because presence like that demanded attention. And Emily walked beside Daniel now, her son between them, her expression unchanged, calm, composed, untouched by the whispers that had once tried to define her. And Victoria Hayes stood exactly where she had been, but everything about her had changed, the confidence in her posture replaced by something more cautious, more aware, as her eyes moved quickly between Daniel, the principal, and Emily, connecting pieces that no longer fit the version of reality she had built just minutes earlier. And the silence spread outward, filling the space like a wave, until no one dared to speak first. And that was when Daniel stopped, not in the center of the room, not in a dramatic gesture, but in a place where he could be seen clearly, his voice calm when he finally spoke. "I believe there was some confusion earlier," he said, and the understatement of the words made them heavier, not lighter, because everyone in that room knew exactly what he was referring to, even if no one had acknowledged it out loud. And the principal stood slightly behind him, his presence reinforcing the shift without needing to explain it, while Daniel's gaze moved briefly across the room, not searching, not accusing, simply observing. And when it settled for a moment on Victoria, it was not harsh, not confrontational, but it was direct, and that alone was enough to break whatever remained of her earlier certainty. And she straightened instinctively, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Because what could she say now that would not expose what had already been revealed? And Daniel continued, his tone unchanged. "My family values privacy," he said, "but we also value respect." And the words landed with quiet precision, cutting through any remaining doubt. Because they did not accuse, they defined, and in doing so, they left no room for interpretation. And around the room, subtle shifts became visible, eyes lowering, expressions softening, the earlier confidence dissolving into something closer to recognition, to understanding, to the uncomfortable awareness of having been wrong. And Emily said nothing. She did not need to, because the moment no longer required her voice. It required their realization, and it came, slowly but unmistakably, settling over the room as the truth replaced assumption, as reality corrected perception. And for a long second, no one moved, no one spoke, because the weight of what had just been exposed was not loud, but it was undeniable. And in that silence, the lesson had already begun to take hold, even if no one had yet found the words to admit it. No one spoke after that, not immediately, because the kind of truth that had just settled into the room did not invite quick responses. It demanded reflection. And for the first time since Emily Carter had walked through those doors, the silence was no longer filled with judgment. It was filled with awareness, heavy and unavoidable, as people stood where they were, replaying the last 10 minutes in their minds. But now through a different lens, one where every glance, every whisper, every quiet laugh carried a weight they had not considered before. And Victoria Hayes felt it more than anyone, standing at the center of a moment she had once controlled but no longer understood, her posture straight but no longer confident, her expression carefully neutral, but unable to hide the shift behind her eyes as realization settled in, not all at once, but in pieces, each one harder to ignore than the last. And she looked at Emily again, really looked this time, not at the clothes, not at the surface, but at the presence she had dismissed so easily. And what she saw now was not someone out of place. It was someone who had never needed to prove anything in the first place. And that realization did not come with embarrassment alone. It came with something deeper, something quieter, the kind of understanding that arrives too late to change what has already been done. And across the room, others began to shift as well, subtle movements, softened expressions, the absence of earlier certainty replaced by a careful distance, as if everyone was recalibrating not just how they saw Emily, but how they saw themselves. And Daniel stood calmly beside his family, not triumphant, not confrontational, simply present, his earlier words still lingering in the air, not as a warning, but as a standard that could not be ignored. And Emily remained exactly as she had been from the beginning, composed, steady, her hand resting gently on her son's shoulder as he looked up at her with quiet trust, unaware that he had just witnessed a moment that would shape more than just his first day at a new school. And the principal stepped forward slightly, his voice measured but clear. "We will be addressing this matter immediately," he said, though his words felt secondary now, because the real correction had already begun, not through policy, not through authority, but through the simple exposure of truth. And as the room slowly began to move again, not with the same ease as before, but with a new awareness that could not be undone, Emily turned to leave, guiding her son gently toward the exit, Daniel walking beside her. And no one stopped them, no one questioned them, because nothing more needed to be said. And as the doors opened and closed behind them, the quiet they left behind was not empty. It was full of realization, of reflection, of a lesson that would linger far longer than the moment itself. Because sometimes the most powerful shifts do not come from what is said loudly, but from what is revealed quietly, in a single moment that changes everything. And that day, in a room filled with people who believed they understood value, something far more important had been made clear, something that could not be measured in status or appearances, only in the way people chose to treat one another when they thought no one was watching. And for those who had witnessed it, that understanding would not fade easily, because respect, once truly seen, cannot be ignored again. It stays, it lingers, it changes you, whether you are ready for it or not. And as the story settles into silence, one truth remains, simple but undeniable, that dignity does not announce itself. It reveals itself in the moments when it is challenged, and in those moments, it shows exactly who we are and exactly who we are not. Respect often reveals itself when you least expect it. If you enjoy stories that uncover truth, dignity, and hidden strength, do not forget to like and subscribe. The next story might just change the way you see the world. Thank you so much for watching.